Hey, this is Danny Eny with Firepole Marketing, and you're listening to Stephanie O'Brien's Moved by Purpose podcast.
Now just think about this for a minute, and I think about this often. For me, would any of that had happened had I not first become alcoholic and then a recovering one? You have to scratch your head and wonder. And so that's where the gratitude comes from when we talk about. If your life turned out great on the other side, you have to be thankful for the journey down into darkness.
Are you longing to know what your purpose is? Are you on the wrong career path? Do you feel like there must be more to life? Don't worry, there's hope. It's time to be moved by purpose. Now your host, Stephanie O'Brien.
Hey, you are listening to the Moved by Purpose podcast with your host, Stephanie O'Brien. Thank you for checking in this week. I'm excited to introduce this guest. His story is so inspirational. I was totally engrossed in his story and the journey he has gone through. He has overcome so much loss and tragedy and hardships, and he's still going and he's still fighting. And I know that if you feel like you are just seem like you can't catch a break, or you just experienced a loss, or you just feel so discouraged and that you can't win or get ahead or something, this is such a time for you to listen. At such a time as this episode is meant for you. His name is Clark Gaither. He is fellow master coach, certified with me, with Dan Miller and the 48 Days community. And his website is clarkgaither.com or Dr. Burnout. And his primary focus is to help transform the lives of individuals who feel they are burned out by retooling their mindset for success and unleashing their creative potential. You need to check him out. Very wonderful man. If you're a dentist, CEO, owner of a company, attorney, physician, or anyone experiencing major burnout, connect with him. He totally gets it and really can help you break free and out of that cycle. Without further delay, let's introduce him. Welcome to the show, Clark. I am honored to have you on today.
Well, hi, Stephanie. I'm so happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes. Now, you've been the mastermind group or part of the coaching mastery group with Dan Miller. So I have seen your name and heard of you for a while, and I'm excited to actually finally connect with you and get you on the show.
Well, me too. And I see your posts either on Facebook or on LinkedIn quite frequently.
Yeah, that's good.
So I knew all about you too. So.
Yeah. It's good to get my name out there, our name floating out there.
That's right.
So the first question I ask every guest is to help us get a better understanding about you and what are the events or reasons that led you to doing what you do today.
Well, I sort of took a very circuitous route through life up until now. There was no direct path to anything. Let me just say that. I remember vividly when I was in about the 6th or 7th grade, I was a straight A student up until then, and I hit the 6th or 7th grade, and school became boring to me. I wanted to sit at my desk and daydream and think about faraway places, and I was a science fiction buff, and so I just wanted to sit and daydream. My classes were boring. If I were living today, I would probably be diagnosed with ADD or something and put on some sort of medication. But my grades began to slip, and my parents were called into the principal's office. And I was sitting right there when the principal said, you expect too much from Clark. He probably should become a house painter like his father. And I was sitting right there, and I thought, okay, fine. And let me just say, for the next few years, I met my principal's expectations of me, which were not very high. And I really, after high school, I went 1 year of college because everybody else was going. and my parents wanted me to go, and it was a disaster. My grades, I don't even know if I had a GPA actually rose above 1 or not, but
O point.
yes, 0 point something. And so I did the best thing I could do for myself then, which was stop. I quit. I quit college. I went to work at Radio Shack. And, well, actually before that I hung wallpaper for a few months. My dad had taught me to do that. And then I took a job at Radio Shack. And the manager, after I'd worked there a little while, decided to leave, and the district manager didn't have anybody to take over the store, and I said, well, if you'll give me a chance, I'll try to run this store. And I was 19 at the time. I became the youngest Radio Shack manager in the country. And he did give me the store, and I learned it was trial and error, but I did pretty well after the first year. They gave me a bigger store, and then they gave me another opportunity after that. About a year in that store, I built it up and increased the sales, and they gave me a bigger store. And 4 years later, I find myself in Hickory, North Carolina. And the whole time I was with Radio Shack, my confidence level had risen because I'd had some successes in the company. And I began to consider some old dreams, and one of them was medicine. I had a country family physician when I was growing up. He used to make house calls. He would come out to the house when I was sick, and he delivered me, and he set my broken bones and sewed me up a few times. And I really looked up to Dr. Horsley, and I thought, that would be awesome. I like science and problem solving, and I began to entertain the thought of going back to school. But I had a job with Radio Shack. I was successful with them. I was getting a regular paycheck, and I was getting ready to swap that for living on borrowed money and a dream, really, because I had no promise I would get in medical school. And
yeah.
We were just talking about something similar to this earlier, making a big life change like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting at the counter pondering this when a customer came in. He was one of my regulars, and he said, "You look perplexed." And I said, "Well, I am." He said, "Well, what's up?" And I told him. He said, "Well, what's your life been like with Radio Shack?" And I said, "Well," I told him about, coming through the ranks and getting bigger stores and having some success. And he said, concerning, you wanting to go back to school and you're afraid and all that, he said, "It sounds like you can do whatever you make up your mind to do." And he sort of turned on his heel and walked out the door. And I was just dumbstruck because in that moment, that was exactly what I needed to hear. It was the right time, right place, right words. In fact, I talk about that in my book, Powerful Words. To this day, there's still some emotion I can tap into just by thinking about what he told me. And I enrolled in college the next day. Left Radio Shack. I did a 4-year program in 3 years. I had a great GPA. I applied to medical school but didn't get in. That took me down to ECU, where I did a master's program. And not only did I learn higher level biology when I was at ECU, I also learned I rediscovered beer and partying. And actually, that was one of the more darker periods of my life because I became alcoholic over about the next 4 or 5 years. Even I finished a master's program, then got into medical school, and I drank all through medical school and had problems because of it. And when I made it through medical school, but not without some difficulty, and I struggled every day. I thought, today I'm not going to drink. I promise, I swear to God, my parents, myself, I'm not going to drink today. And by 3 o'clock that afternoon, I'd be drinking.
Yep.
And it was just a living nightmare. It really was. When I finished medical school, I matched residency at ECU. And when I went on that interview, the residency program director said, everything looks pretty good. Your grades are okay. Nothing to write home about, but your board scores are pretty good. You did great in the clinics. He said, "I just have one reservation." I said, "Oh, what's that, Dr. Patton?" He said, "Well, I hear you like to party." I said, "Oh my God, where did you hear that?" Of course, of course I like to go have a beer every now and then, but I assured him, that I had everything under control and I would be fine. So I started residency 1st of July in 1985 and made it all the way to August before I came into work one day with still alcohol on my breath. My residency program director could have fired me right then, right there, but he called a newly created entity in North Carolina called the North Carolina Physicians Health Program. It had been started by the North Carolina Medical Board, the North Carolina Medical Society, and state legislature. And it was to help physicians who got into trouble with drugs or alcohol or behavioral problems or whatever. And so he called the director and he said, I've got a young man down here. Now, the program started in 1988, and here I am in 1989. I was one of the first residents in the program. They came down and gave me an assessment, and I signed a contract saying I wouldn't drink any more alcohol. I would go to AA 3 times a week, and I would, abide by all the rules of the residency program, or I would be kicked out. And I signed the contract, and I went home and drank that night, and the next night, and the next night. And I kept drinking every night. I remember one weekend of particularly heavy drinking in January, the following January, and it was January 21st. That was my last drink. I came to work the next day, January 22nd, with still alcohol in my breath. Somebody picked up on it, called my residency program director. He called me into his office, and now I'm in violation of my contract with NCPHP and the residency program. I heard some very powerful words then, too. It's, Clark, you're going to resign today from your residency. You're going off to treatment. When you get out, we'll see if you come back or not. And if you don't go, you're fired. So the next day, January 23rd, 1990, that's what I count as my sobriety date.
Wow.
I was standing in my doorway. I bent down to pet my little puppy that I'd just gotten my girlfriend, and I began to cry because I knew my life was about to change. At the same time, I was very scared because I didn't know. I'd tried so many times before to stop. What if this didn't work? That's what scared me. It wasn't going off to a treatment center. It was what if this doesn't work? I turned to my girlfriend and I said, will you be here when I get back? She said, of course. She stuck by me through all of that. So I went to a 28-day treatment center, inpatient treatment program, and I wanted to learn all that I could about sobriety and recovery, and I really threw myself into it. And the third night there, we went to an AA meeting in Aberdeen, North Carolina, and a couple hundred people showed up. I couldn't believe how many people showed up in recovery. And I heard a woman speak who gave just a heart-rending story of her life, and her story was so much worse than mine. I mean, it was just awful. And yet there she stood, triumphant, sober, all together, powerful. And she let loose some words that just shot through me. She said, at one point I knew I didn't have to live like this anymore. And again, it was one of those right words, right time, right person saying them, and they were powerful for me. So I knew I'd be okay. I've been sober, ever since January 23rd, 1990, so it's been more than 25 years.
Wow. Congratulations. That is awesome.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the road to recovery is certainly not easy and a journey, so 25 years is very, very awesome.
Yeah, there's a difference between sobriety and recovery. Sobriety is the absence of substance. If you don't use or don't drink, you're sober, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in recovery. You don't go to AA or NA to learn how to not drink or not drug. You go there to learn how to live without alcohol or drugs, and there's the difference. And so recovery is quite different than sobriety. If you're in a great program of recovery, you're sober. You can be sober, though, and not in a great program of recovery. You could be in relapse behavior. So there's a difference. So I ended up marrying that girl. We lived together for 5 years, and she finally consented to marry me. I finished residency, and we moved to Goldsboro, North Carolina, which is where I currently practice, and we had a great life. In fact, in 2002, I became the Family Physician of the Year in North Carolina, largely because I started a free clinic, which still operates. We started it 14 years ago. All the care is free on the clinic. All the labs are free. All the drugs are free, and it sees 1,000 patients a month. We've had over 120,000 patient visits in the last 14 years, and I've been the medical director ever since it started.
Wow.
None of that would have happened Now just think about this for a minute, and I think about this often. For me, would any of that had happened had I not first become alcoholic and then a recovering one? You have to scratch your head and wonder. And so that's where the gratitude comes from when we talk about when we go to AA meetings. Mm-hmm. If your life turned out great on the other side, you have to be thankful for the journey down into darkness. You really do. So that was my trial by fire then. Denise and I, we had like I said, a great life here in Goldsboro, and we made plans, we dreamed dreams, and we started building on those dreams. But 3.5 years ago, we had a normal Valentine's Day. It was Valentine's Day 2012, actually. And we did the normal couple Valentine things. I got her some flowers, and we went out to eat, and we had a long time, and it was a normal Valentine's Day. Exchanged cards, which we both wrote in, and it was great, and everything was fine. And I went to work the next day, and it was a Wednesday, and Wednesdays we have caduceus meetings at my office, and the caduceus meeting is a recovery meeting for healthcare professionals. We have one every Wednesday at my office, and other physicians or nurses or dentists show up who are in recovery, and we have a meeting. And so I left the meeting and walked out of my office and opened my Jeep, and there's a letter laying on my Jeep seat, and it's from Denise. And I open it, and it says, "My feelings have changed. I'm leaving. I've already consulted an attorney."
Oh, my goodness.
Now, this was the day after a normal Valentine's Day, and we had been together for 24 years. I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea.
Blindside. Complete, unexpected blindside. Big hit.
It was almost like a bomb went off in my hands. I mean, I couldn't square the last 24 years with what I was holding and reading in my hands. It just didn't make any sense. I just read it over and over again. I just thought, this has got to be some kind of joke. And a terrible one at that. And once I knew this was really happening, the first thing I did was call 3 people I knew who know I'm in recovery and told them what had happened, because people in recovery, when they start keeping secrets, they're in relapse behavior, and you don't want to sit on something like that, because I'd made up my mind in the first hour that whatever was going to happen, if it was going to be bad, I wasn't going to drink over it. And that's because I had a good program of recovery. But she did leave, and I almost let it destroy me. It wouldn't have destroyed me without my permission. So I'll say I almost let it destroy me. It was so bad. I lost 41 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. And because I'm in recovery, I don't take mood-altering substances. So I didn't take any sleeping pills. I didn't take any anti-anxiety medicine, and no antidepressants, none of that. And I just kind of white-knuckled my way through it, and I had the help of a skilled psychotherapist, which I saw twice weekly initially. I saw her twice in one day, actually. That's how big a mess I was in. Patients, I was still seeing patients, and I would ask them frequently to repeat what they just said, because I just could not concentrate. And sometimes I'd have to leave the room to cry. I mean, it was just so bad. It was just bad. After about 4 months of the worst of it, I started to feel a little better, and I knew I wasn't going to feel this way forever. And actually, I knew at the outset I wasn't going to feel this way forever. It was going to be hard. It was going to be tough. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. But let me tell you what happened. After about 4 months or 5 months, I had all this emotion I needed to do something with, so I started blogging. And first I had a blog called Healthcare Provider Recovery, and it was geared toward healthcare professionals who are in recovery. And I was writing 1,000 words a day. I mean, I had all this feeling I just had to get out, and it was therapeutic. And then after months of that, a friend of mine had gone to the New Media Conference, and she came back and she said, I heard these 2 speakers. One of them was Dan Miller, and he was awesome. And he's got this book called 48 Days to the Work You Love, and he's got a big 48 Days community. And the other fellow I heard was Cliff Ravenscraft, and he's the podcast answer man. I said, well, what's a podcast? I had no idea. I didn't know what a podcast was. And she explained it to me, and after about 10 minutes, I was on fire. I thought, this is what I've got to do. I've got to have a podcast. And so I had one for 6 months called The Power of Transformation, and actually it's still up on the iTunes. It was,
I like the name.
yeah, Power of Transformation, and it was kind of generic. It was a recovery-related podcast. I didn't know what I was doing half the time, but I did it for 6 months. I put one out a week, I think 28 or 29 episodes. I did conclude it because I was planned on regrouping and doing something different with it. And that same year, I don't have any family left. My parents are gone. My sister, unfortunately, died of pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. My ex's parents and her brother, I'm still close to this day because, I knew him for 24 years and now 27 years, actually. And so they invited me to Thanksgiving the year before, but this year they were all going to be out of town. And I thought, well, I don't have anything to do for Thanksgiving. I like to hike, and so I got online, and I found this little, it's actually one of the Canary Islands called La Gomera, and it's they're owned by Spain, off the coast of Morocco, though. So I went to La Gomera and hiked for a week, and it was awesome. I did it over Thanksgiving, and the first day was a big, long hike, and it was 12 miles, and I started out at like 300 feet above sea level and went up to the top of the mountain at 4,800 feet, and then back down the other side to like 1,500 feet to where my next night's stay was going to be.
Sounds awesome.
So I'd send my bags ahead of me, and I'd do the hike, and so the only day that it rained was that first day. And so I hiked all day in the rain, and I got up to the top of this mountain. I should have had an unobstructed view of the island and surrounding islands, and instead I couldn't see 30 feet. The whole top of the mountain was in a cloud. And so I'm thinking, I sat down and I just asked myself, how did I get here? How did I get here? I came up here for clarity, and I can't see anything.
Oh, my God.
And so my thoughts turned inward, and I started thinking about those events in my life that really could have defeated me or held me back, and somehow or another I made it through. And every time I did, when I got out on the other side, things were better. Not only were things better, sometimes they were gloriously better. And the seeds of my book were planted right there, right then. I didn't know I was going to write a book exactly, but the thought process had started. And months after I got back, I started looking at my blog posts, and I thought, there's a common thread through these posts. I printed them all out and began to organize them, and that was 40% of my book. The other 60% I wrote over about 6 months. And then the book was published in May of this year, May 19th, Powerful Words. And so, as bad as Denise leaving was, as horrible as it was, had she not done so, I would not have stretched out into these other areas, which I found fantastically rewarding. I've developed new relationships. I'm in Dan Miller's mastermind group, and that has been a joy and a pleasure, and I continue to learn through that group. And he wrote the foreword to my book, actually. Dan did. And so I would never have written a book. I've got a second book coming out. I'm developing some online courses. I'm doing speaking and coaching and corporate training, especially as it relates to professional burnout. So anyone who's listening who's been through these tragedies, just put your head down, know that it's not going to last forever, and just keep moving. Just keep moving forward, because chances are, if you look back in your life at all those events, you thought, this is the end of my life, I'm never going to recover from this. It was probably the best thing that could have happened to you, right?
Yeah.
That has happened so many times in my life. And so put a lot of those stories in the book. Now, that is a very long answer to a very short question.
But it was so good, though. I really love when people dive deep into their stories, because it helps us get to know you. And the more transparent and vulnerable you are, the more I think it resonates with those that are listening. So you have dropped some powerful words all throughout your story. And I really think that your journey is very, very moving, because I have yet to meet somebody that hasn't had some things that they have had to overcome, and that isn't something that is a pain point for them. We all have something, a dark battle that we are fighting. And in the midst of it, it can feel oppressing, depressing. You can feel defeated. But if you choose to keep going, you will come out victorious. It's just you don't know how long you have to keep fighting. And, I wish sometimes life would give us, like a personal trainer where they say, two more, 5 more seconds.
Right.
I wish we had that
Yeah.
in real life.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Nope. And I think everybody has the wherewithal. They have the tools. Everybody, most folks, unless you were born with some sort of debility and some sort of, mental incapacity, most people, the vast majority of people on the planet have the skills and the intelligence and the wherewithal to figure things out and get through any hardship. And the only ones that don't are the ones who choose not to. They stop. They give up. I've got patients. I see patients every day. And by the way, I'll tell you, I've been in medicine for 23 years, and I've yet to see normal. I don't know where normal is. I don't know what it looks like, because everybody's got issues. When you said we all go through these things, Stephanie, you are absolutely right. We all do. And I don't care if you look at Mr. and Mrs. James Perfect and think that they've got it all together. Their lives are great. Under the surface, you have no idea what's going on, because everybody's got issues. And so I've never seen normal.
Yep.
But the only ones, I've got patients who talk about something that happened 20 years ago like it was yesterday. And they're stuck back there. They've never advanced forward. They're still so wounded and hurt that they just gave up. Whatever it was that happened, they just remain stuck back there. And those are the ones that don't advance. Those are the ones that don't learn anything that life was trying to teach them. And as a result, it's a precious life wasted.
And it's very hard to see that. And you said it, and sometimes it's hard to hear, especially when you are kind of in a victim mode or victim mentality, where it's you're choosing to be that way, or you're choosing to stay that way. And when I was in victim poor me mentality for a while, I thank God for the people that gave me a kick in the butt. And I was so mad at them when they did. I thought they were the most heartless people. Where, like,
you just don't understand me.
You're so mean. You're so judgmental. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would cast all kinds of "you're judgmental," you all kinds of things. When really I go back and I'm like, thank you for loving me enough to say those hard words to me. And they were never cruel words. They were all just like, well, what are you going to do differently?
Yeah. Let me give you a follow-up story to what I was saying earlier about my principal that said, maybe Clark, my parents expected too much out of me, So this was years later, decades later. A friend of mine who I grew up with, and we worked in the same restaurant together when I was 15, washing dishes and bussing tables. His father died, and I was close to his name was George. I was close to George and Larry, his son. So I went back for the funeral. And we went to the funeral, and we went back to Larry's house, and we're milling around out in the front yard, and I see an old man across the street in the yard. And he's got a cane, and he's moving kind of slow, and he looked familiar to me. And I said, Larry, that man over there looks familiar to me. Who is he? And he said, well, that's Mr. Caldwell. I said, that's my principal. That was my principal from grade school. And so I walked over, and as soon as I approached him, I said, hi, Mr. Caldwell. My name's Clark. And he said, Gaither. And his face kind of lit up. Well, one side of it did. One side of it didn't, because he had had a stroke. And that's why he was out with the cane, and he was just walking around out in the yard. And he said, well, my goodness. He said, I recognized you instantly. What have you been up to? And at that point, I was in medical school. And I told him, and he said, quote, I always knew you were going to turn out great like that.
Like, really?
And so And so I said, Mr. Caldwell, you were the best principal I ever had. Thank you. So at that point, there was no reason to be catty or vindictive or anything like that, because I was in medical school, even though I was drinking like an alcoholic that I was. At least I had some promise of success on the horizon. And I thought about it later that evening. I wonder, Mr. Caldwell was kind of a crafty, smart individual. I wonder, since I was sitting there and he said what he said, whether he intended to say that to me or not, to give me a kind of a kick in the pants. And, who knows?
Yeah. Either way, you turned it around.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. That's awesome. And you're writing, you mentioned your second book. You're running circles around me, Clark. I got to catch up. I really got to finish my book.
Start writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's written. I just got to finalize it, work with an editor and get it done and get it published and stop putting it off.
That's right.
So,
you don't fear your failure. You know that, right? You fear your glorious success. That's why you're not doing it. So.
Yeah, that's so true. I honestly have made that confession before, where I used to think I was afraid of failure, when really I'm like, it's not failure. I'm not. It's this tricky thing called a fear of success, because that means what's on the other side.
That's right.
More work, more responsibility, more follow-through, more accountability. I'm like,
more stretching outside your comfort zone.
Yep. Further stretching. Yep. So I'm like, okay, I'm done. And because that's the self-sabotaging, I've had to learn, like, man, why do I notice this pattern? Why do I will do 99% of the hardest work there is. There's 1% left to do, and I'll somehow sabotage it.
You know why you do that? You know why? I know why.
What?
Because you feel you don't deserve it.
That was other work I had to go through as well. I was like,
everybody does that. This was eloquently stated in one of my favorite books I just read in this last 1 year. It has become one of my favorite books. I go back to it all the time and reread sections of it. And it's called The Big Leap. Have you read The Big Leap?
I haven't. I've heard of it. I should. Let me put this on my book list and add this to the resources. Yep. The Big Leap.
The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And in there he talks about your upper limit challenges. And you will succeed up to a point, and then you will find some way either to sabotage it or not complete it, because and really deep down inside in your conscious and subconscious you feel you don't deserve it.
Yeah, and it takes. I mean, I've done that. I've studied a lot of mindset, because I basically. My own patterns in life has been my biggest case study. I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? What is going on? And I noticed the same thing in my clients. And I'm like, okay, so I know this. I can spot that pattern, and I recognize it because I see it in myself. And so I started working through and processing through a lot. And it does it. I used to misdiagnose, and a lot of people do this, especially entrepreneurs, where it's not so much, entrepreneurs are not afraid of failure. We are willing to take risks and to fail. But the ones that repeatedly seem to procrastinate or self-sabotage or just keep finding themselves doing things that end up like removing them from the success, it's because they're afraid of success, and then it gets rooted further into worthiness, feeling they're not worthy or they don't deserve it. Yep. And it's this vicious, repetitive cycle, and finally I was like, okay, I got to process through why the heck I believe such a stupid thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a dumb story. What story am I telling myself? Like, I must be believing a lie or convincing myself of some story. Yeah. So,
yeah.
and I finally was like, I'm so done. I'm so done not picking up the phone. Job hunters will do this too. People that are like, I spent 30 hours sending out 5,000 resumes on the computer. And it's like, okay, and how about the networking or the picking up the phone? Like, there's something that's like a huge element to their success that they're not doing or they're not following through on, because they know it's like the one thing that will get them there, they won't do.
Yep.
Then I did that. I did that for a long time. And I was like, all right, I'm done with the emails. I'm picking up the phone. Massive success. Just like that. I'm like, there we go.
Yeah.
I mean, I just...
And he talks about that in the book, and he talks about a lot of people will find a comfort zone. They'll operate in what he calls a zone of excellence. It's not like they don't produce excellent results in whatever they're doing, but they're not operating in their zone of genius because they want to stay where it's safe. They want to do what feels easy and good rather than what feels hard and difficult, like picking up the phone. It's just easier to sit in front of a computer and type to some, no-name screen.
Yeah,
but then picking up the phone and actually exerting effort toward another human being, now that's a lot scarier. And, so I'd rather do what I want to do rather than what I have to do or what I need to do.
Oh, yeah. I really got the fuel under my butt when I was like, okay. Because I've been doing this, and I remember we were talking, before this official recording, and I remember when I was working full-time building this business and how hard it was. And I kept saying, if I just had more time, and then I had more time, and I still wasn't seeing the success I really believed I would get. And I'm like, okay, what is it? Because I filled my time with a bunch of busy, tedious things that wouldn't get me the success I needed. And so finally it was like, okay, if I had an extremely limited amount of time, where like if I only had 5 hours a day or even a week to do something, what is the activity that I would do to get me the farthest and the fastest? And it came down to picking up the phone.
Yeah. Yep.
And making phone calls or getting in front of people. And I'm like, okay, and that's what I'll do. I'm going to stop getting distracted by this massive to-do list, and the first thing I'm going to be doing and the things I'm going to prioritizing is getting in front of people and making a clear ask too. That's another thing that people will avoid. They'll like build the relationships and never go for a clear ask. And because again, it's like a fear of rejection. What if they say no? And the funny thing is, I got pretty used to rejections, and then that was bizarre. I'm like, there were a lot of people that said no. I know what it feels like. I've overcome it, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm so afraid of it.
Or it's like, I'm not going to ask for this big fat fee because secretly I don't think I'm worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. There were just so many things. When it came down, I would get, when I started, when I would have the conversation with a prospect client, and then they asked the question, how much? And I would be sweating. I'm like, don't ask. If they're asking, that's a really good sign.
That's a good sign.
They're interested. And they're interested and they want to know. And that was when I feel like I dropped the ball. I would get so uncomfortable, lack confidence, and I wouldn't close the sale because that insecurity would come off. And so I had to practice, and it came down to I have to believe so much that I can help these people and not make it about me, but make it about how the transformation that they're going to get.
Yes. And
when I shifted that, I mean, I can name numbers with confidence and not bat an eye. And even if people go, "Whoa, that's a lot of money," or "Whoa," it doesn't faze me. I just come back and say, well, this is what you get, and we work with it. But I just remember in the early days, I was uncomfortable saying my fees are $50. They're a lot more than that. $50. But if you can't afford that, we can work on it. I was a sad case. Sad case.
We'll give you a coupon.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
gosh.
Well, yeah. Everybody goes through this kind of self-doubt, especially when you're developing a product that helps people, because sooner or later you're going to ask yourself the question, who am I to be telling these people anything?
Oh.
Who am I? I can't even solve my own problems. How am I going to help other people solve their problems? And so
Yes.
you feel like the fake, the charlatan, at some point you will feel
Imposter.
that. The imposter. That's exactly right. People have put different words on it, but basically you feel like you don't know what you're doing. That must be some relic of days gone by when we were really afraid to go out of the cave, because we might get eaten by something. And so there's always this fear, this hidden fear. It's amazing. If you think about fear, I've seen PET scans, CT scans of the brain, MRIs of the brain. I've seen all sorts of, I've seen brains. I've seen, real honest-to-God human brains, both in live patients and in cadavers.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
I've seen slices of brain under the microscope, and I can tell you there is no area of your brain labeled fear. It's just electrons and neurotransmitters whirling around between your ears. That's what fear is. Yet, it can seem like an impenetrable steel wall when it comes to something like picking up the phone. Isn't that funny? I mean, it's just odd.
Yep. And it steals, if given into or listened to, or you allow the fear to become the ruler or dictator of your life, it robs life. It steals dreams. And I feel like that's so sad, because I just think how much better of a world we would live in if people would just get past their fear. And I'm not saying it's an easy battle, but it does get easier. I mean, like, you do become more of skilled at hurdling it, overcoming it. I'm not saying I don't have fear. Like, it still speaks and comes, but am I going to turn to it and start paying attention to it? Or am I just going to be like, oh, this pesky thing is back. I know how to deal with this.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You're never going to be shed of it. It'll be like a shadow. It's going to follow you around. But you don't have to keep turning around and staring at it. You can just keep walking forward knowing that, that shadow's back there, but it's going to follow me. I'm not going to follow it. And so it's here's one great way to help with fear, and I talk about this in the book, and because all those events in our life that we'd rather forget but probably learn some valuable lessons from, we should actually use them to our own advantage and our own purpose. Let's take your biggest fear. I don't care what it is. Let's say it's an unreasonable fear of spiders or some, whatever it is. The more you tell people how you're afraid of spiders, the less afraid of spiders you become. I mean, it's been proven scientifically over and over and over again. When people voice their fears, they become less fearful of them. And so all those tragedies in your life that you'd rather tuck away and forget, they might be worth pulling out and taking another look at them, because there's a lot of emotion attached to those events, a lot of words. And when you verbalize those events, you reconnect yourself with the emotion of those events. And when somebody hears your story, somebody is going to connect with you on an emotional level. And that's where you've bent that energy to your own purpose, by helping others, because they will identify with it. And they'll say, oh, gosh, I felt just like that, just like you did a while ago when we were talking about something else. You said, oh, yeah, I felt like that before. And it's pervasive. It's universal. We feel like it only happened to us, but it's happened to thousands of people. And others are sitting in fear today who need to hear your story. And when they do, they'll say, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not weird. I'm not crazy. And then you've helped them, and then you've reduced your own fear. And so everybody wins. And so that's really the thrust of my book.
Love it. Can't wait to get it. Is it on Amazon or is it on your website?
Yep, it's on Amazon in paperback and a Kindle version. Sometime next year, a hardback version will be out, and it'll be in the bookstores. And
oh, exciting!
I know. And then I've got a book. It's a gift book coming out next year called The Graduate's Handbook. Now, this is for graduating high school students and college students, and the title is The Graduate's Handbook: your no-nonsense guide for what comes next. And the tagline is a collection of the hardest, easy lessons I've ever learned. In there are some quotes from me, from quotes from people I've admired throughout, not only contemporary people, but people throughout history, some stories, and it's really just a wealth of basic information that people will need when they get started with their life.
Nice. Both of those are relevant, whether you're listening and just graduating, or the powerful books. I'm reading the word book. Powerful Words. Both books I would suggest checking out. You said Graduate Handbook is coming out in May?
Well, it'll actually be a little before, Matt, probably in April. We're going to try to get it out before graduating season, of course.
Yeah.
And
okay.
So we'll be working.
I was like, perfect time, because that's when everyone's graduating.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, it has been a privilege to have you on, Clark. Thank you so much for inspiring us with your story. I definitely have been motivated and encouraged by your journey and your transparency, and I know with certainty that the audience has too. Where else can we connect with you?
Well, I have a website. It's clarkgaither.com, so it's real easy. Also, you can find it also under drburnout.com, drburnout.com. I work with professionals who feel like they're burned out in their profession or in life, and so either one will get you to the same website, but clarkgaither.com is good enough. And let me just say, it's been a great pleasure to be on your podcast, and I really appreciate the invitation. I hope I've been of benefit to you and your audience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you again, Clark.
Thank you. Anyone who's listening who's been through these tragedies, just put your head down, know that it's not going to last forever, and just keep moving. Just keep moving forward, because chances are, if you look back in your life at all those events, you thought, this is the end of my life, I'm never going to recover from this. It was probably the best thing that could have happened to you.
There you have it. That was Clark Gaither. Wonderful man, wonderful story. I'm honored to know him and so privileged to have him share such a beautiful story on this show. If you felt that this story touched your heart, make sure you connect with him on his social media platforms or send him a message. And then also, if you haven't done so already, connect with me. Let me know that you liked it. Suggest maybe other guests for the show. Let me know if you have a question or you want a certain topic answered. I'd love to hear from you. Come on over to movedbypurpose.net. Get your Freedom from Fear manifesto. We spoke about fear, and this book really helps you process through. Like he said, there's nothing in the brain that shows where fear resides. There's more things at work where fear is related, and it teaches you how to finally get free of it and overcome it and really pursue your purpose. Fulfill it. Don't keep letting fear win. Don't let fear rob you of your destiny. So this book will help empower you and equip you. It's probably January by the time you're listening to this, so hopefully you did not miss out on the half-off coaching and that you took full advantage of it. January, I am launching really exciting programs, rolling those out. Very excited for them. Passion Project should be opening. My Master Your Mindset seminar has been repurposed to my first home learning program. Videos, transcripts. Well, not quite sure if there's going to be transcripts, most likely, but definitely videos. Great community. There's going to be monthly group coaching available for those who purchase this course. I will have more information. The target goal is to be ready for this to be available in January, and I will be paying more attention to doing a big promotion later on in the year. Anyway, if you have not done so, be sure to subscribe, rate, and write a review. in iTunes. Much appreciated. I'll talk to you all next week.